Live from downtown Detroit, home of WDIV and Click on Detroit, Local 4 News at 5 starts now.
The steady rise shows no signs of letting up as Michigan fights to flatten the curve. Today, there are 1,749 new cases of coronavirus in our state as the total number of deaths creeps ever closer to 1,000.
Of course, coming up, we're going to begin off the top here at 5 with 4 Live radar and the threat of severe weather as a strong storm system set to move through Metro Detroit.
We want to get right to Ben. And Ben, this is one of those times where we don't want to see the sun, right?
Yeah, definitely not doing us any favors, Kim and Devin. That was only destabilizing the air, making these thunderstorms more possible by the time they get here. And you can see from the map, there's already severe thunderstorm watch out for the western half of the state. You can see it includes Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, does not reach all the way here. But out there towards Milwaukee, and I know they've got primaries, there are folks standing outside. They've got some pretty nasty severe storms there. There's a warning just near the Lake Michigan shoreline, a couple lightning strikes above it. We're not looking at anything on 4 Live radar right now, but we do anticipate that this stuff is going to probably start popping around 6, 7 o'clock and likely in the north and west when it happens. And then that spreads all the way to 11 o'clock. That's the window we're watching. It's not a big portion, but it's definitely one you're going to pay attention to. 1 inch plus hail, could be seeing it up to golf ball size, 70-mile-per-hour winds possible, and also an isolated tornado not out of the question. So all of our severe weather threats, guys, are in play. We'll take a closer, deeper dive into this in just a few minutes.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Well, now to the very latest on Michigan's fight to slow the spread of coronavirus.
As we do each day, let's take a look first at the day's big developments. First, the numbers. Total confirmed cases now sits at 18,970, and that has led to 845 deaths in Michigan. Also today, the state legislature voted to extend Michigan's emergency declaration through April 30th. More on that, in fact, much more in just a moment. But we're going to begin with something we all need. Mayor Duggan says the numbers are offering a small glimmer of hope.
So now what we're seeing is the rate of doubling is slowing to every 5 to 6 days. This is what we are trying to accomplish, and what we are doing is starting to work. This is the first glimmer of light we have seen from the data since this pandemic started. The storm's not over, but for the first time, we can see we can beat this, and we can beat it in weeks, not months, if we keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that said, we do know hard days still lie ahead here in Metro Detroit and across the state.
Well, that's why the state legislature swiftly passed an extension to Michigan's emergency declaration through the end of the month, yet not as long as the governor initially wanted. Rod Maloney is in Lansing and shows us how a required in-person session became vastly something different.
A lot of questions about whether this needed to happen or even should have happened, but they made massive adjustments to have a legislative session today. Just to get in the building, you had to have your temperature taken, take a health care survey, and then the floor sessions were unlike anything that has ever been seen in this building. Clad in an Everyone versus COVID-19 t-shirt, the lieutenant governor opened the morning Senate session with a handful of mask-clad senators on the floor, keeping lots of hand sanitizer, rubber gloves, and even a face shield at the ready. They needed 20 for a quorum and had exactly that many.
The resolution is adopted.
In under 13 minutes, they got a unanimous concurrent resolution vote. Over in the House, they were more Spartan in the House. Although they needed 55 for a quorum and 78 representatives signed in, only 5 were allowed on the floor. In under 10 minutes, the House got to its unanimous vote. Representative Ryan Berman didn't mind taking part.
It's safer to be here than going into your local grocery store, gas station, something like that.
House Speaker Lee Chatfield said the legislature wants to work with the governor, but
I think extending the state of emergency to the end of June is the wrong call. We're learning more about this virus on a daily basis and every single week, and I think this needs to be reevaluated every few weeks, and that's the decision that we made today.
I think that it's unfortunate that they didn't go the full 70-day extension for the state of emergency. This is really necessary to give protections to our frontline workers. They will still have those protections, but now the legislature will have to come back in a few weeks.
And of course, the politics of this are pretty much everything else politics. It's about control. The governor gets 28 days per the Constitution. She was looking for more than that. The legislature saying, no, we'll keep it to 28 days because they want to have options. If they feel like the state can open up quicker, they'd like to have that option. If it needs more, they can add more time. Governor not so certain that's the best answer, but that's where we are. Reporting live, Rod Maloney, Local 4.
Yeah.
All right, Rod. Among many statistics we are seeing in the number of cases is the high number of deaths in Michigan's African American population.
You're right, Devin. Take a look at this chart. You can see African Americans represent 41% of COVID-19 deaths. The next closest race, Caucasian, at 28%. We want to bring in Dr. Frank McGeorge. And Frank, I've said this all along, that's a significant difference.
Yeah, it sure is. And it's a trend being seen around the country as many states and regions are breaking down the numbers by race. No doubt the COVID-19 pandemic has affected African Americans very differently than other races, and the reasons need to be investigated. Whether you're talking about Michigan, where 33% of cases but 40% of deaths have occurred in African Americans, or Illinois, where 29% of cases but 42% of deaths were in blacks, COVID-19 is causing a higher rate of deaths in African Americans. In Louisiana, 70% of people killed by COVID-19 are black, even though they only represent 32% of the state's population. Now, the reason for this needs more analysis, but we do know, overall, African Americans are more likely to suffer from high blood pressure and diabetes. Both are risk factors that have been identified in other countries for developing more severe disease in COVID-19. Now, many speculate that the COVID-19 pandemic is helping to uncover health disparities that have long existed in America. Another avenue being investigated is whether there could be genetic and physiologic factors that could make certain races more susceptible to SARS-CoV-2. Everything from different numbers and types of certain receptors to the way different races might respond to the massive inflammation induced as COVID-19 worsens are being looked at. Now, I realize it's really tempting to simply jump to the conclusion that the mortality differences that we're seeing in African Americans is simply due to healthcare disparities. But it is just as important to sort out any other potential contributing causes so we can figure out if there may be a more specific way to correct the problem. There's little doubt that underlying illness plays an important role here, but there may be much more beneath the surface. Back to you.
Yeah, okay. Frank, thanks. Well, another roller coaster session on Wall Street today. The Dow closed 26 points lower after rising up 937 points in early trading. Both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq finished below 0.3%. Some investors believed stock prices were getting ahead of the reality where coronavirus shutdowns are likely to weigh on the economy significantly beyond the second quarter.
Well, we're now 2 days into the week that was projected to be a peak for coronavirus cases in many parts of the country. And there are, as we mentioned earlier, some glimmers of hope. Alice Barr in Washington, as there are still growing questions about where the virus will strike next. Alice?
Devin, as coronavirus cases continue to rise across the country and the world, we're now learning details behind the numbers about the communities most likely to be affected. And there are new questions about the federal response. In the two-front war to save lives and rescue the economy, the Trump administration under mounting pressure to get help where it's needed most, amid signs that hospitalizations may be stabilizing in New York, growing concerns that rural communities are about to see their own surge.
Most of the rural hospitals don't have an ICU. They do not have a ventilator. And if they do have a ventilator, which will breathe for the patient, we don't have the staff to man the ventilators.
And new data shows African Americans are getting sick and dying at higher rates.
Number one, people unfortunately are more likely to be of low socioeconomic status, which makes it harder to social distance. Number two, we know that blacks are more likely to have diabetes, heart disease, lung disease.
On the economic front, President Trump touting the new Paycheck Protection Program to save small businesses, even as it struggles to keep up with overwhelming demand and overcome technical glitches and confusion. President Trump acknowledging the program's $350 billion may not be enough.
We just asked Congress to pass legislation to fund an additional $250 billion for Paycheck Protection Program.
At the same time, the Trump administration facing new scrutiny over a top White House advisor's memo that reportedly warned back in late January the coronavirus crisis could cost the U.S. trillions of dollars and put hundreds of thousands of American lives at risk. It came as President Trump was still publicly downplaying the risk. In a sign of just how quickly the U.S. death toll is rising, it took a month to get to the first 5,000 deaths, and now 5,000 Americans have lost their lives in the past 3 days alone. In Washington, Alice Barr, Local 4.
Boy, that puts it in stark relief. All right, Alice, we are expecting a live update from the president from the White House. We will get to that when it gets underway. Well, she says she's made hundreds of calls to the unemployment office before finally speaking to a human.
But it's what that person told her that left her even more frustrated. That story is coming up ahead here at 5.
And Ben's back in just a minute, tracking the threat of severe storms moving through Metro Detroit over the next several hours. Make sure you stay with us for that. Hank?
It was a big trip for local school kids to Washington, D.C., but obviously had to be canceled. A big battle with the travel company, but now some big news for those kids. Help me, Hank, tonight.